A wolf soulmate romance written by Clara Nightshade. Prologue. A witch cursed by time, a wolf born for her. Elara Everhart is the youngest-looking Grand Archmage in Aetheris, an immortal woman trapped in a teenage body and bound by a curse no spell has ever broken. 4 decades, she's kept to the frost-bitten heights of her enchanted tower, hiding behind wards, ancient books, and the myth of the untouchable Silver Witch. She has long stopped hoping for anything as fragile as love. Then a half-starved wolf boy breaks into her wards. Rowan Fenwick is wild magic incarnate, defiant, wounded, and fiercely loyal to no one. But Elara sees something in his golden eyes that shatters her practiced detachment, recognition. As she reluctantly takes him in, what begins as a wary guardian-ward arrangement soon deepens into something neither of them expected. But Aetheris is unraveling. Transmigrants from other worlds are appearing. The world veil is growing thin. And a secret cult, the Order of the Forgotten Gods, is kidnapping beastkin and children to resurrect a fallen deity. Elara and Rowan are drawn into a war not just for their lives, but for their very identities. With the fate of a world hanging in balance, a girl who stopped growing and a boy learning to become a man must face the truth. Some bonds are written not in blood or fate, but in choice. And some loves are stronger than time itself. A slow-burn romantic fantasy full of ancient magic, chosen family, soft domestic moments, and a love that redefines destiny. Chapter 1. The Witch of Frostspire. The tower sighed in the cold. Or perhaps that was just the wind, pressing its ghostly palms against the frosted panes as if hoping to be let in. Frostspire Tower had that effect on everything: the wind, time, people. It made them linger, breathe slower, grow quiet, and wonder, half in awe, half in wariness, about the silver-haired witch who lived within. Elara Everhart, Archmage of the Sixth Circle, Guardian of the North, Mistress of Seals and Space-Time Anomalies, and according to the more unflattering corners of the Arcanum Consortium, that cursed child who froze her own soul, was currently ankle-deep in a clutter of spell scrolls, loose stardust, and one very smug slime. "Glorp," she warned, without looking up, "if you eat my Chronoquill again, I'm feeding you to the Mandragora." The gelatinous creature jiggled in offense, blushed blue, and slowly oozed away from the ink-stained desk. With a sigh that managed to sound both ancient and exasperated, Elara gathered her silver robes and perched delicately on her armchair, though truly, it was more of a throne cobbled together from worn velvet, levitation charms, and years of solitude. The hearth was crackling beside her, enchanted wood flaring a soft blue. The arcane fire didn't warm her skin, it never did, but it kept the tower's wards humming, the seals tight, and the silence pleasantly breathable. Elara liked silence. It was predictable. Unlike people, who tended to ask things like, "Why do you look 13?" or "Did you curse your ex into a squirrel?" She had not. Though the temptation had been excruciating, the truth was more complicated. A temporal feedback loop, triggered during a reckless experiment in her teens, had frozen her biological aging somewhere between awkward adolescent and eternal babysitting risk. As far as the magical community was concerned, she was a prodigy with the face of a student council treasurer. A dangerous one, to be sure, but difficult to take seriously when she had to transfigure her robes daily just to avoid tripping over the hem. Still, the isolation suited her. She had her books, her theories, her floating tea kettle that steeped exactly 3.5 minutes because time was relative, and she'd rigged the enchantment accordingly. And then something scratched at her pantry door. Elara didn't move. It happened again. A gentle, tentative rasp of claw against wood, followed by a thud, and a low, desperate whimper. She set her book down, Temporal Displacement in Post-Veil Enchantments, Volume 2, and stood. With a flick of her fingers, her tower adjusted, walls softened, wards stilled. The hearth dimmed. "Glorp," she said quietly, "hide." The slime vanished with an indignant burble. Elara padded barefoot toward the pantry, skirts whispering over the ancient stone. As she approached, the wards pulsed in warning, foreign presence detected. Beastkin, juvenile, injured. Hunger reading critical. Her heart tightened. She hated when the tower got specific. She opened the door. A boy crumpled to the floor at her feet. He was filthy. Gaunt. No older than 10, though it was hard to tell beneath the grime and the layers of rags he'd fashioned into a half-cloak. His feet were bare, his fingers scraped raw, and his wolf ears, real ones, twitching from atop his matted silver hair, were flattened against his skull. He'd been trying to steal a loaf of bread, and had promptly passed out from what looked like a cocktail of exhaustion, blood loss, and probable anemia. Elara blinked, then sighed. Loudly. The kind of sigh that echoed down ivory corridors and across decades of bad decisions. "You're bleeding on my tile," she said. The boy whimpered. Not from fear, she realized, but from pain. His body curled in on itself, as if trying to disappear. His tail, grey, limp, and tangled with burrs, tucked tightly against his side. "Oh, for the love of the 9 realms," she muttered, and knelt beside him. A whisper of power bloomed from her palm as she hovered it over his chest. Diagnostic pulses rolled through her mind like medical scans made of light: cracked ribs, shallow lacerations, borderline hypothermia, and more old bruises than she could catalogue without getting very, very angry. Which she did. Quietly. Efficiently. She gathered him into her arms, he weighed less than one of her spellbooks, and carried him to the couch. The hearth flickered back to life on cue, casting soft gold across the boy's hollow cheeks. He stirred but didn't wake. Elara fetched a healing salve, a clean towel, and one of her old nightshirts, which was absurdly oversized on him and thus perfect. She cast a soft barrier to keep the heat close and the magic gentle. The slime peeked from behind a bookshelf. "Glorp. No, he's not a pet," she said, dabbing the boy's forehead. "His, something else." She didn't name it yet. But as she looked at him, so small, so obviously abandoned, the faintest whimper escaping his lips like he hadn't dared speak in weeks, something fragile shifted in her chest. Not pity. Not quite. But something adjacent. A memory flickered, unbidden, a younger Elara, shivering on the marble floors of the consortium hall, ears ringing with the words, "We don't know how to reverse it. She's a risk." She tucked the blanket around the boy more securely. "You're safe now," she said, quietly, firmly. "This place is warded. No one will hurt you here." His tail twitched. Elara blinked. His tail had wagged. She stared at it. "No," she whispered. "Don't you dare." It wagged again. Slow. Hopeful. Elara groaned and buried her face in her hands. "Oh gods," she muttered. "I adopted a stray." The boy woke up halfway through her 3rd mug of mage brew and promptly tried to bite her. To his credit, it was a half-hearted attempt, somewhere between a snarl and a flinch, performed with all the conviction of a cornered kitten pretending to be a direwolf. Elara didn't flinch. She simply lowered the steaming mug and stared him down with the unblinking calm of someone who had once negotiated with a sentient flame and won. "Are we doing this?" she asked, raising a single, aristocratically unimpressed brow. The boy froze, yellow eyes wide and wild, then immediately backed away until he hit the edge of the sofa and looked personally betrayed by furniture. His claws twitched. His tail, which had been relaxed under the blanket, stiffened like an accusatory exclamation mark. "You passed out in my pantry," she said, slowly, like she was explaining thermodynamic entropy to a particularly distressed raccoon. "Then proceeded to bleed on my floor, hijack my empathy circuits, and claim one of my antique throws as your personal burrow." He stared at her, chest heaving. She leaned forward slightly. "Do you want food, or should I just wait for you to eat my sofa?" "A beat. 2. Food," he rasped. His voice was hoarse and uncertain, like it had forgotten how to form syllables. But the hunger in it was sharp and undeniable. "Good. Because I'm not warding my cushions again. The last time I did, they developed sentience and tried to unionize." The boy blinked. For a flicker of a second, he looked confused. Then, like his face forgot it wasn't allowed to smile, he let out a huff that might have been a laugh. Elara stood and gestured vaguely toward the hearth. "Stay warm. No stealing. No biting. No spontaneous combustions." He blinked again. "Kidding," she added. "Mostly." The kitchen of Frostspire Tower wasn't designed for cooking so much as it was designed for potion alchemy and the occasional bake-off with other grand archmages who refused to acknowledge that scones were a legitimate form of transmutation. Still, Elara made do. She summoned bread warm, fresh, a little too perfectly shaped, and slathered it with her honeyed frostberry jam. A roast fowl from her stasis cabinet joined the party, sliced with surgical precision and served on real porcelain because she refused to lower her standards for guests, even if they were malnourished beastkin with dirt under their claws. She floated the tray toward the boy with the kind of grace that usually preceded a lecture on mana resonance decay. He eyed the food like it might bite him first. "It's not poisoned," she said, draping herself across her favorite reading chair with the tired elegance of someone who hadn't slept in 36 hours and was running entirely on magical caffeine and poor decisions. "Why?" he asked. It wasn't the question she expected. "Why what?" "Why, give me food." Elara tilted her head, watching him through a curtain of silver hair. She considered the myriad answers she could give: because you looked like a dying cub, because the Council of Mags would frown on frostblasting a child, because the sound of your stomach growling was louder than my lecture wards. But instead, she said the truth. "Because I remember what it feels like to be cold, and hungry, and alone in a world that doesn't make space for people like us." His ears twitched. She hadn't meant to sound so tired. Or so soft. The boy didn't answer. But he picked up a slice of bread, and slowly, reverently, took a bite. Elara pretended not to notice the way his shoulders trembled when the warmth hit his tongue. Later, when the snow thickened and the sky outside turned the color of old parchment, Elara ran a new diagnostic. She told herself it was curiosity, academic rigor, a responsible use of her highly classified Sears lens, which could scan life force threads and trauma echoes with exquisite detail. But when she tuned her magic to the boy's form, what she found wasn't just physical damage, it was systematic neglect woven into the muscle memory of a child who'd been running too long. Layers of scarred magic, underdeveloped reflexes, stunted mana flow. And something else. Something that pulsed quietly beneath the surface, a well of power so deep and ancient it made her stomach turn. She closed the lens and let out a slow breath. Not just a stray, then. But she didn't press. Not tonight. He fell asleep curled by the hearth, tail draped over his legs like a protective scarf. Elara covered him with another blanket, because of course she did, and because apparently she was now the sort of person who fed strays and tucked them in and let them snore slightly into her enchanted pillows. "Glorp," she murmured as the slime reappeared, eye stalks blinking at the sleeping boy. The slime blurbled inquisitively. "Yes, he's staying," she said. "No, he doesn't shed. That much." A pause. "Fine, I'll sweep tomorrow." She turned back to the boy, now peaceful, even if his claws flexed slightly in his sleep, like he was still half dreaming of fighting monsters. Or maybe just running from them. Elara didn't touch him. She didn't have to. Her magic had already memorized his frequency, his warmth, the unique cadence of his pulse against the tower's wards. She'd named sentient storms, mapped the flow of mana through void rift lattices, and debated metaphysics with dragons. But this was new. A boy who had nothing, asking for nothing, and giving her unintentionally, unreasonably, a sense of purpose she hadn't realized she'd lost. "I should take you to a village," she whispered to the fire. "Or the Beastkin Alliance. Somewhere, safer." The tower creaked in response. Even it didn't believe her. She sat beside him, not touching, just watching as his chest rose and fell. Slowly. Steadily. Safe. He stirred once, murmuring something unintelligible. Then, very clearly, "Elara." She startled. He was asleep. Fully. Yet somehow, he knew her name. Elara blinked at him. Blinked again. Then exhaled with the sharp precision of someone suppressing 28 simultaneous emotions. "Stars above," she muttered. "I am so doomed." Chapter 2, Frost and Fur. By the third morning, the boy had reorganized her entire potion shelf. Not alphabetically, Elara could have handled that. Alphabetical systems, while inefficient in cases involving rare alchemical components like etherthorn or basilisk bone marrow, were at least predictable. No. He had arranged them by color. As in, he had lined up her 57 vials of magical reagents in a perfectly gradient spectrum, starting with pale frost mint essence and ending in an unsettling, possibly sentient shade of deep maroon. "Why?" she asked, lips pressed thin, Does my powdered phoenix bile now sit between the violets and the pinks? The boy, who was sitting cross-legged on the floor and polishing her athame with religious focus, glanced up without a hint of guilt. It looked sad by itself. Elara stared at him. He blinked innocently. His ears twitched. It was too early for this. Or possibly too late, given she hadn't slept since last night's experiment attempting to stabilize a tear in the localized mana field surrounding Frostspire Tower. She pinched the bridge of her nose and reminded herself, very calmly, that she was a grand archmage and therefore above the urge to throw a tantrum in her own kitchen. I don't care if it looked sad. That's volatile bile from a firebird. It goes in the flammable and likely to explode section. Rowan, because apparently he had a name now, though he'd whispered it so quietly she hadn't even registered it until yesterday, nodded solemnly. Got it. Keep sadness and combustion apart. Elara gave up. Not dramatically. Just with the weary sigh of a woman slowly realizing that her fortress of solitude had, against all odds, been invaded by a deeply expressive, chronically helpful werewolf boy. Despite her better judgment, Elara began teaching him. It started with little things: how to handle enchanted quills without inciting them to duel, how to pronounce mana resonance without the syllables warping into an actual echo chamber, but quickly snowballed into more. Rowan, it turned out, was terrifyingly fast at learning. Not in the polished, precocious academy student way, but in the raw, desperate sort of way a person learns when knowledge has always been out of reach. When he read, it was like he was devouring the words. When he practiced spellcraft, it was with a focus that made her worry he'd set himself on fire out of sheer determination. He mispronounced half the incantations. Accidentally summoned a tiny storm cloud that followed her around muttering insults in Old Fae. But he tried, gods, he tried, and Elara found herself watching him more than she should. Not just watching. Noticing. The way his ears perked up when she praised him, the way his tail curled tightly when he was embarrassed. The way he always waited to see if she was eating before he took food from the tray. The way he flinched when lightning cracked too close to the tower, then pretended he hadn't. He never asked her for anything. And yet, she kept giving. She caught him once, staring at his reflection in the enchanted mirror in her study. It didn't show true images, more like echoes of potential, flickers of selves not yet realized. Elara had long ago stopped looking into it, because all it ever showed her was the same thing: herself, older. Beautiful. Uncursed. Someone she didn't quite believe she'd become. But Rowan stood there, eyes wide, hands twitching at his sides. When she walked in, he didn't move. Just kept watching the image flicker between his current self, thin, twitchy, two sharp angles, and another version of him. One taller, stronger, confident. Still him, but more. She didn't say anything. Just stepped beside him. It shows what could be, she said softly. He didn't answer. After a while, he whispered, I don't think that's me. Elara turned to him. Why not? He hesitated. I don't think I'm meant to be anything. It shattered something in her. Quietly. Efficiently. That's the worst kind of nonsense, she said. And I've literally taught nonsense as a language elective. His eyes flicked to her, surprised. You're already something, she continued, voice steady. You're Rowan Fenwick. Assistant to the Witch of Frostspire. Reorganizer of volatile potions. Slayer of dust bunnies. Very questionable soup maker. He gave her a look that might have been the early evolution of a smile. And you'll be more, she said. You get to choose what that looks like. That's the point of being alive. He didn't answer. But later that night, she found her scrying mirror cleaned, the grimoires stacked neatly beside her desk, and one clumsily folded note in childlike script. Thank you. I'll try. Rowan developed a habit of announcing his chores like he was running a hotel. Elara, he'd call out from the library, I've dusted the floating shelves and re-shelved the sentient tomes alphabetically. The grumpy one with teeth is sulking in the fireproof section. Elara, I remapped the warming wards in the hallway. You shouldn't get frostbite walking barefoot anymore. Elara, I tried baking. The bread may be sentient. She never told him to stop. Not even when he oversteeped her tea by a tragic 12 seconds. Not even when he accidentally woke the mandragora from hibernation. Because his presence, noisy, earnest, full of strange magic and quiet grief, filled the tower with a life it hadn't had in years. And because, though she'd never admit it aloud, she liked hearing her name spoken like that. Like it mattered. Like it belonged to someone. One night, she found him asleep at the foot of her armchair, wrapped in her old cloak like a cocoon. A book had fallen from his hands, Introductory Enchantments for the Extremely Stubborn. His tail curled around him protectively, his breathing slow. She could have moved him. Instead, she conjured a soft windward charm to keep the hearth warm and sat beside him, magic dimmed, breath steady. The tower had always been quiet. But this silence felt different. Warmer. Shared. Maybe even welcome. It started with the tower humming. Not the usual kind of humming, which was more of a gentle magical purr like a satisfied cat with a leyline addiction. This was different. A restless vibration beneath the floor, a jitter in the ambient mana, like the bones of the building were bracing for something uninvited. Elara noticed it first during a breakfast lesson on healing sigils. One moment she was explaining the difference between corporeal and metaphysical scarring, using the metaphor of bad tattoos, which had proven shockingly effective, and the next, the ink in her quill danced off the parchment in a spiral of glowing script that fizzled into frost before landing. Rowan looked up, a line of jam smeared on his cheek like a badge of culinary honor. Was that supposed to happen? No, she said, watching the residue evaporate midair. And before you ask, no, I didn't enchant the ink again. Not after the last incident. Okay, but that was one talking sentence. And it didn't even insult you this time. It called me a chronically overqualified child, Rowan. He tilted his head. Was it wrong? She threw a bread crust at him. He caught it in his mouth with alarming ease. But the joke didn't fully land, not when the tower's wards had begun to pulse irregularly. Not when the northern windows refused to close, and the scrying basin showed nothing but static, like a broken crystal radio caught between worlds. The world veil was thinning. Again. Which meant something, or someone, was interfering with the boundaries between Aetheris and the realms beyond. Which meant trouble. That night, Elara calibrated the tower's external sensors while Rowan snuck cookies from her charm-sealed pantry. He thought she didn't know. She absolutely knew. She just stopped caring once he figured out how to disable the proximity runes without triggering the alarm bell, a feat that required either remarkable cleverness or alarming recklessness. Likely both. Did you ever, he asked between bites, meet someone from another world? Elara paused, fingers hovering above the crystal orb that read cosmic vibrations. She turned slightly toward him. Why? He shrugged, but not convincingly. I heard the council talk about them. Transmigrants. People who fell through the veil. Are they real? They are. Rare, though. The veil usually keeps things stable unless something, she hesitated, or someone disturbs the equilibrium. He frowned thoughtfully. Like, tearing a hole in your shirt because you kept poking it. A laugh escaped her before she could stop it. Precisely. Except the shirt is reality, and the hole lets in things we're not supposed to see. Rowan nodded slowly. What happens if too many holes appear? Elara glanced back at the orb, its glow flickering erratically. We stop being the only ones looking through. That same night, the wind screamed. Not whispered. Not howled. Screamed. The kind of sound that made your magic coil tight in your chest, that made wards shudder and floors creak and ancient spells blink open as if awoken from hibernation. Elara bolted upright, robe askew, hair in a silvery mess that even her grooming charm had abandoned. She burst into the hallway with a pulse of defensive magic already in her palm. She found Rowan curled in the corner, arms over his head, whole body trembling like the fear had unzipped him and climbed inside. She dropped beside him immediately, placing a hand, gently, firmly, on his back. It's just the wind, she said softly, layering her voice with calming magic. It's just noise. You're safe. He didn't speak. His claws had gouged shallow lines into the stone floor. His breathing came in short, ragged bursts, and his tail had vanished under his cloak like he was trying to disappear into himself. Elara inhaled. Exhaled. Then, without asking, she pulled him into her arms. It wasn't a graceful embrace. Not practiced or poised. But it was warm. Grounding. Human. Rowan didn't flinch. He clung to her like she was the only anchor left in the world. I dreamt it, he whispered after a long moment, his voice barely audible against the fabric of her robe. The screaming. The masks. The fire. I dreamt it, and then it came. She stilled. The screaming from the wind. He nodded against her shoulder. I wasn't sure if it was real, he added, voice breaking. Sometimes I don't know. Elara's heart twisted, not from pity, but something heavier. Older. A knowledge she didn't want to name but understood all too well. Because magic didn't just live in spells and scrolls. It lived in memory. In trauma. In the kind of pain that reshaped your soul's frequency like a broken tuning fork. You're not broken, she said, because she needed him to know that. You're tuned differently. Like the way some stars burn brighter because they're about to shift into something stronger. He pulled back slightly, golden eyes wide. Is that a real thing? Yes. It's called stellar metamorphosis. He blinked at her. Fine, I made that up, she admitted. But the metaphor holds. You're changing. Not into something wrong. Into someone extraordinary. His ears perked, cautiously. You think I'm extraordinary? I let you reorganize my potion shelf. Of course I do. He smiled, tentative and small and painfully hopeful. And that, Elara decided, was more dangerous than any transmigrated horror that could slip through the world veil. Because that smile was doing something far worse. It was making her care. After she tucked him back into bed, this time in the guest room she'd hastily cleared of dangerous books and one very offended sentient coat rack, Elara returned to her scrying basin. The static had stopped. Instead, it pulsed with a soft, rhythmic light. Not a warning. A message. One word etched itself across the surface in glowing script. Soon. Elara stared at it, heart hammering. Then, behind her, Rowan murmured her name in his sleep. And for the first time in years, she wasn't sure which made her heart race more, the warning from beyond the veil. Or the way he said her name like it meant home. Chapter 3, The Silver Pup and the Academy. The letter arrived wrapped in too much pomp and too little respect for Elara's nerves. It didn't materialize through her usual mail wards, which, frankly, she found rude, but instead appeared in a flash of council-certified teleportation magic, directly atop her breakfast scone like it was some kind of sacred jam garnish. She stared at the envelope, which was sealed in gold wax and bore the crescent mirror sigil of the Aurelian Academy of Magic. The scone, now tragically jam-splattered, stared back in soggy indignation. Rowan peered over her shoulder, mug in hand, steam curling around his nose. Is that the pretentious place with the tower that looks like a teapot? It's an observatory, she corrected automatically, already peeling the wax seal open. And it's not pretentious. It's. She glanced at the gleaming calligraphy inside and made a face. Okay, yes, it's very pretentious. Rowan nodded wisely and took a sip of his tea. Do they want to expel you retroactively? Because I could forge a letter of protest. My handwriting's improved. Elara gave him a sidelong glance. You realize I was once their highest-ranked laureate, right? They named a spell after me. Yes, but you also froze their atrium fountain during a faculty debate and enchanted it to scream whenever someone said mana threshold in a condescending tone. I was 17. And provoked. The letter, now fully unfolded, shimmered with layers of magical ink because the council never met an enchantment it couldn't overuse. She skimmed the contents, already predicting the bureaucratic melodrama. Urgent, unprecedented circumstances, unusual fluctuations in the world veil, transmigrant activity at a record high, need for experienced specialists in arcane phenomena, request for her immediate presence as guest instructor and veil consultant. Elara groaned and dropped her forehead onto the table. I'm taking that as a no. Rowan asked, gently nudging her ruined scone out of reach of a curious slime. They want me to teach, she muttered into the wood grain. At Aurelian. Starting next week. Rowan blinked. They know you hate people, right? She rolled her head to the side. I don't hate people. I just find them exhausting. He smiled. You like me. Only because you clean my library and bring me tea without judging my morning hair. Also, he said, setting down his mug with exaggerated care, because I'm adorable and you've grown disturbingly attached. She threw a spoon at him. He caught it. But behind the banter, the letter buzzed with quiet urgency. Elara could feel it. The veil wasn't just thinning, it was fraying. And Aurelian Academy, with its sprawling ley-line intersections and poorly managed teleportation portals, was a hotspot for anything seeking to slip through the cracks. They didn't just want her as a guest lecturer. They needed her to keep the world from unraveling one transmigrant at a time. Frostspire didn't take kindly to being left alone, but Elara left behind a dozen autonomous spells, 3 elemental guardians, and a very smug mandragora to patrol the wards in her absence. She packed light, just a few grimoires, a custom-fit robe stitched with spatial compression charms, and one very eager wolf boy. I get to go too, right? Rowan had asked the moment she'd told him. She hesitated. The academy wasn't exactly known for being welcoming to beastkin, let alone adolescent ones with limited magical training and a tale that often acted on its own agenda. But when she looked at him, ears perked, eyes bright, hope written so plainly across his face, she sighed and nodded. You'll be my assistant. His grin could have powered an entire spell battery. He packed twice as fast as she did. The Aurelian Academy of Magic rose from the cliffs like an architectural love letter to both grandeur and impracticality. Its towers spiraled into the clouds, each shaped with a flair that made Elara think the architect had confused structural stability with dramatic flair. The central observatory, the teapot, as Rowan so lovingly called it, gleamed with mirrored panels that reflected the sky in dizzying kaleidoscopic swirls. Students in color-coded robes darted between stairwells, carrying books and familiars and existential dread in equal measure. Professors wore the weary expressions of those who had been tenure-trapped for centuries and were quietly plotting revolutions through syllabus reform. The moment Elara stepped through the threshold, a hush followed. Not because she looked imposing. She absolutely did not, thanks, eternal curse, but because every mage over the age of 30 recognized her. The Silver Witch of Frostspire. The girl genius turned hermit. The one who'd rewritten the theory of dimensional binding and turned down every award the consortium tried to throw at her. And because she walked in not alone, but with a tall, sharp-eyed wolfkin boy at her side, chin lifted, tail swaying with something dangerously close to confidence. Rowan didn't shrink under the stares. He straightened. Elara felt a small, strange swell of pride. A senior mage, someone she vaguely remembered as Clarion Maltese, a pompous wind specialist with a voice like overripe cheese, approached with a too-slick smile. Elara Everhart. A delight to have you back in civilized company. Clarion, she said sweetly, your wards are misaligned and your aura is leaking pride. I'd get that checked. His smile twitched. And this is my assistant, she said. Rowan Fennick. Clarion's eyes narrowed just a fraction. Rowan offered a toothy grin. Don't worry, he said. I'm house-trained. Elara choked on a laugh. Clarion coughed and disappeared with a stiff bow. I adore you, she muttered, loud enough for only Rowan to hear. He pretended not to blush. He failed. Their quarters were modest by academy standards, 2 joined chambers with windows overlooking the western ley line, a shared study space, and a library bigger than Elara's bedroom. Rowan immediately tested every cushion, opened every drawer, and declared the books smelled less old than yours. You know, she said as he collapsed into a plush chair with a satisfied huff, you don't have to follow me into every madhouse I get summoned to. He looked at her, ears twitching thoughtfully. I know. Then why? He shrugged. Because I want to. As if that explained everything. And somehow it did. The students arrived precisely on time, which was suspicious. No one who was truly committed to magic ever arrived on time. They arrived early, ravenous for knowledge and validation, or late, citing temporal dissonance, potion explosion, or a minor incident involving sentient chalk and interdimensional miscommunication. But these 4? They walked into the lecture chamber at exactly 10 past the hour, eyes sharp, postures rehearsed, and expressions somewhere between curiosity and condescension. Elara didn't need a soul SCRY to recognize what they were: high potential, politically inconvenient, and one bad week away from expulsion. Exactly the kind she liked best. She watched them take their seats in silence. Rowan stood beside her at the podium, arms folded, tail lazily swishing like a metronome tuned to passive aggression. He wasn't a fan of the attention, not that anyone had said anything yet, but the way they looked at him said plenty. Not with overt cruelty. Just that subtle, reflexive calculation that always preceded judgment. Elara knew the feeling intimately. She'd worn it once like a second skin. She cleared her throat and flicked her fingers, projecting her voice through the leyline speakers. Welcome to Applied Veil Theory and Advanced Magical Contingency. I'm Archmage Elara Everhart, and yes, I know what I look like. No, you don't need to comment on it. No, I won't age differently if you offer me tea, compliments, or soulbound pacts. She paused, letting the tension bend just slightly. This is Rowan Fenwick, my assistant. He'll be helping with fieldwork and keeping me from murdering anyone who calls me child. A snort escaped from the far left desk. The girl responsible had a manner of reddish curls, a slightly askew collar, and the aura of someone who owned far too many friendship bracelets and had lost all of them in duels. Josie, according to the notes Elara had received. Magical aptitude, chaotic. Personality, alarmingly charming. Next to her sat Elara, straight-backed and expressionless, with silver-rimmed glasses and a concentration aura so dense it made the air feel like molasses. The kind of student who triple annotated her grimoires and refused to speak unless summoned. Warren, the third, had a haircut that suggested a blade and a grudge, and the bored expression of someone who had seen too much for his age. A reincarnated hero, allegedly. Elara was skeptical, but the sword at his hip vibrated with sealed memories, so she gave him points for at least pretending to be mysterious. And finally, Zachary. Blonde, golden-eyed, posture like a prince who had read too many books on posture. He gave Rowan a once-over that was far too practiced to be casual. His aura shimmered faintly with divine residue. Elara narrowed her eyes. Zachary narrowed his back. Oh, she thought. This'll be fun. The first lesson was basic veil topology. By basic, Elara meant she casually reconstructed a three-dimensional projection of multi-realm reality using nothing but chalk, verbal focus, and a sassy hand gesture. The visual resembled a sprawling fractal web of glowing strings, some of which shifted with every heartbeat of the room's inhabitants. Rowan watched from the side, arms crossed, tail now perfectly still. She could feel his gaze on her, steady, reverent, occasionally tinged with or in ways that made her consider recalibrating her emotional resistances. When she paused to explain the destabilization vectors of transmigrated souls, Zachary raised a hand. Elara Archmage Everhart, he corrected, with a smirk that was 2 degrees too polite. I've read that such soul crossings are theoretically impossible without divine intent. Are you saying otherwise? Elara tilted her head. I'm saying the veil doesn't care about your theological canon, Zachary. Josie laughed into her elbow. Elara scribbled a footnote so fast her quill hissed. Zachary's smile stiffened. I didn't mean to offend. Yes, you did, Elara said cheerfully. And it's fine. Offense is a sign of engagement. But if you plan to challenge me, do try to keep up. I enjoy the exercise. Rowan bit back a grin. He wasn't subtle about it. Zachary noticed. His eyes narrowed, this time with clear interest. And what about him? He gestured at Rowan with just enough restraint to seem civilized. What are his qualifications? Elara's expression didn't change. But the room chilled ever so slightly. Rowan's qualifications, she said calmly, include not being dead after surviving multiple veil fractures, developing spell-adjacent instincts faster than anyone I've met, and reorganizing my library with alphabetical and chromatic logic. A beat. And he makes a mean spiced stew. Josie looked delighted. Can he make cookies? Rowan cleared his throat. Only if you don't mind them slightly haunted. She nodded approvingly. Elara said, I prefer ghosts. They're quiet. Warren finally spoke. Are we doing real fieldwork, or is this another theory-heavy crash course where you scare us with quantum paradoxes and then disappear into a tower? Elara considered him for a long moment. Would you like the honest answer? Yes. Then yes. You will absolutely be scared. And you will absolutely be taken into the field. His mouth twitched. Not a smile. But close. After class, Rowan was quiet. They walked the wide halls of the academy's west wing, their steps echoing against stained glass windows that shimmered with spell-encoded sunlight. Elara glanced sideways at him. He was frowning, softly, but still. A line between his brows, tail drooping just slightly. You were incredible, he said finally, voice low. She blinked. Excuse me? He looked up at her. In class. You were so confident. So smart. Everyone was just listening. She blinked again, more slowly this time. That's what professors do, Rowan. No, he said. That's what leaders do. Elara stared at him. He wasn't blushing this time. He was being serious. And that, somehow, was worse. Because it made her feel exposed in ways her robes and wards couldn't protect against. He added, voice hesitant now, do you think they'll ever see me that way? Like, I belong here? She stopped walking. He did too. Rowan, she said, carefully, you already do. The fact that you're even asking the question tells me you're more than qualified. His ears flicked. His gaze dropped to the stone floor. She reached for his hand before she could second-guess the impulse. He froze. Besides, she added lightly, if anyone has a problem with you, just tell them you have access to my entire cursed grimoire collection. He looked up at her then, eyes wide, smile hesitant and genuine. You're scary when you're protective. She smirked. You say that like it's a bad thing. Chapter 4, The Forgotten God's Whisper. It started with a ripple in the wardstone. Elara was sipping her late morning tea, steeped precisely 3.5 minutes, enchanted for optimal bitterness, and accompanied by one of Rowan's blueberry scones that were suspiciously good for someone who claimed not to use recipes, when the stone embedded in the classroom wall let out a soft, high-pitched whine. Not a siren. Not a system failure. Just a note, like a tuning fork straining slightly off pitch. She set her cup down, ignoring the small smile Rowan sent her way from where he stood by the window, half listening to Josie explain the difference between field sigils and cursed graffiti. Her fingers brushed over the smooth, glowing surface of the wardstone. The magic in it trembled, like a pulse skipping a beat. Veil activity. Again. That made 5 anomalies this week, and it was only Stars Day. Elara turned toward the students. Field trip, she announced. Pack light. Bring your brains. Warren grunted in what might have been enthusiasm. Josie squeaked and dropped a quill that immediately sprouted legs and ran off. Rowan looked at her, alert in that quiet way she'd come to recognize as his battle mode, no fuss, no dramatics, just instinctive readiness wrapped in polite concern. We're going north, she added. Something's stirring near the lower villages. And I don't like the sound of it. They arrived at the outskirts of Windmere Hollow by dusk. The village was quiet in a way that didn't feel peaceful. It felt emptied, like someone had taken a bustling market painting and erased all the people with meticulous care. Lanterns still burned in the windows. Livestock huddled in pens. But the air, Elara could taste the tension in it, metallic and sour like spoiled mana. Rowan kept close to her side, his gaze sharp, tail twitching with restrained energy. It's too quiet, he murmured, scanning the tree line. There's no laughter. No children. She nodded grimly. I noticed. An elder met them at the town square, a snakekin woman named Niris, scales dulled from age and grief. Her voice trembled as she spoke. They came 2 nights ago. Shadows. Masks. They didn't open doors. They didn't leave footprints. But in the morning, 5 children were gone. All beastkin. Josie gasped, covering her mouth. Elira's brows knit together in a rare show of emotion. That sounds like ritualized targeting. Very astute, Elara said, though her voice was tight. She crouched near the center of the square and laid a palm flat against the stone. A shimmer of arcane light bloomed around her fingertips, tracing faint residual echoes. She saw flickers, screaming children, silent figures with glowing masks, wards unraveling like smoke. Rowan knelt beside her. What do you see? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she whispered a tracing charm, and the images sharpened. The figures wore bone-white robes with symbols etched in silver. Their movements weren't rushed. They didn't struggle. They simply took. Elara exhaled sharply. The Order of the Forgotten Gods, she said at last. The name rippled through the group like a silent explosion. Josie paled. I thought they were just a myth. Elara shook her head. No myth. I read about them. Fringe cult. Obsessed with pre-veil deities. Mostly disbanded centuries ago after the council sanctioned a purge. Apparently not entirely disbanded, Warren muttered. Rowan's hands curled into fists. Elara stood, brushing dust from her robes. Her heart pounded not from fear, exactly, but from a sharp, pulsing fury that curled low in her spine. Her students saw only the calm on her face. Rowan saw the tightness in her jaw, the way she clenched her left hand ever so slightly. Why beastkin children? Elara asked. Why only them? Elara hesitated. Because the Order believes beastkin are closer to the primal weave of Aetheris, she said. They think shifter magic is untamed, less refined, more ancient. Which makes it ideal for certain types of sacrificial rituals. Especially those targeting the veil. Josie whimpered. They're using kids. Elara's eyes narrowed. Yes. Because they're cowards. And because no one stopped them last time. Rowan's voice was low, nearly growling. Then we stop them this time. She looked at him, and something in her chest tightened again, not painful, exactly. Just loud. He was growing bolder with each day. Sharper. More dangerous to anyone who thought they could take what wasn't theirs. More hers, in a way she didn't yet know how to name. That night, they stayed in the village longhouse, half the students pretending to sleep and the other half quietly sharpening metaphorical or literal weapons. Rowan stood watch near the windows. Elara approached with 2 cups of tea, hers black and bitter, his laced with cinnamon and a calming charm that she pretended not to mention. He took it with a grateful nod. You don't have to fuss over me. I'm not fussing. I'm preemptively preventing a trauma spiral. It's entirely selfish. He huffed something like a laugh. Then sobered. I know this is about more than a rescue mission, he said quietly. You've been tense since the letter. And the veil's acting worse. She didn't deny it. I think they're trying to break it, she admitted. Piece by piece. Sacrifices, rituals, localized distortions, each one is a stitch pulled loose. Rowan looked down at his tea. They used to come for kids like me, he said, not quite a whisper. Back when I was alone. I didn't know their name, but I remember the masks. I remember the smell of burnt sage and old blood. I ran every time. She reached for his hand, slowly, giving him the chance to pull away. He didn't. I'm not running anymore, he said. Not while you're here. That sound again in her chest. Not quite a heartbeat. Not quite a spell. Just him. She squeezed his hand gently. You're not alone anymore, Rowan. His eyes softened. Neither are you. The ruins were almost beautiful. Almost. The outer walls of the old sanctuary, overgrown with starlace ivy and half sunken into the marshy edge of Windmere Hollow, glimmered faintly with what had once been holy warding. Now, the light was wrong. Not gone, exactly, but soured, like someone had rewritten the enchantments with a hand that didn't quite understand compassion or restraint. Elara stood at the edge of the threshold, fingers hovering near the hilt of her staff. Beside her, Rowan crouched low, nostrils flaring as he tested the air. His wolf senses were sharp today, tightly focused, ears swiveling toward every breeze and birdsong that didn't quite sound natural. It smells like dust and copper, he murmured. Old magic. Burned offerings. Fear. Your nose is becoming annoyingly accurate, she replied, not entirely joking. You'd make an excellent forensic mage. I prefer sidekick to brilliant archmage. She didn't answer right away. Not because she didn't have a retort ready, she always did, but because her magic was pulsing against her skin, responding to the latent energy woven through the sanctuary stones. There were too many layers here. Too many threads knotted together, frayed with purpose. The others were back in the village, monitoring the townsfolk and keeping the wards tight. Elara had chosen to investigate the ruins alone with Rowan. Not because she didn't trust her students, she did, mostly, but because something about this place pressed too tightly against the more fragile pieces of her soul. She didn't want witnesses to that. Just him. They crossed the threshold together. Inside, the ruin opened into a wide chamber, ceiling half collapsed, ivy coiling through every fracture. At the center stood a stone altar, cracked and slick with moss, yet unmistakably stained. The residue of blood magic never truly faded. It clung like guilt. Rowan made a soft sound of disgust. That's not animal blood. No, Elara said quietly. It isn't. She circled the altar, boots crunching softly over broken sigil stones. Her fingers traced the faint outlines of old scripts, archaic symbols that predated the council, predating even unified spell dialects. But the core was unmistakable. The sigil of the forgotten. A 7-pointed star spiraling into a single eye at the center. The ancient mark of the cult that had once tried to summon deities older than the gods' entities from the dark side of the veil, where form and logic unraveled and magic had no laws, only appetites. Elara, Rowan said, voice low and tense. Over here. She crossed the chamber quickly. He was kneeling beside a stone arch embedded in the back wall, partly buried in vines. Carved into its frame were smaller, more delicate symbols, tracking marks, maybe, or calendar glyphs. But it was what lay at its base that made her breath catch. A cloak. Small. Tattered. Furred along the hood. And soaked through with residual mana, beastkin mana. Rowan didn't speak. He didn't need to. Elara extended a hand over the fabric and summoned a thread of truth-seeing magic. The cloak shimmered with faint echoes, tiny hands clutching it, a child's laugh, then the sudden severing of warmth. A spell of binding. A portal, forced, not opened. The veil breached through sacrifice, not symbiosis. They're using them, she whispered. As fuel. Rowan's jaw clenched. Then we burn them. She looked at him sharply. His voice had changed, still calm, but lined with something more primal. More resolved. Not just vengeance. Conviction. We don't know how many there are, she said gently. Or where they've gone. He held her gaze. But you'll find out. You always do. There it was again, that unwavering faith in her, so casual it was practically baked into his bones. It should have been overwhelming. Instead, it grounded her. Yes, she said. I will. The ruins held one more secret. In a hollow beneath the altar, sealed by a forgetting ward that would have repelled most mags, Elara found a crystal disc wrapped in frost-spelled cloth. The moment her fingers brushed the surface, the sigils flared with recognition. Encrypted memory, she murmured. Old arcanum pattern. Rowan leaned in. Like a magical hard drive. She smiled faintly. More like a sentient journal. But yes. With a flair for drama. She sat cross-legged in the dirt, summoned a containment dome to block outside interference, and placed the disc between her palms. Are you sure it's safe? Rowan asked, crouching beside her. Absolutely not. But I'm irritated and tired, which statistically increases my success rate. The disc pulsed once. Then it spoke. A voice, not human, not entirely, echoed through the chamber, layered and reverent. The vessel approaches. The veil thins. The bloodlines converge. The god of echoes stirs. Elara felt her heart skip a beat. Rowan's ears went flat. I don't like that. Join the club. The recording faded, but the implications did not. Vessel. Convergence. Echoes. This wasn't just a ritual site. It was a summoning point. A node in a much larger design. And Rowan. Elara's mind turned over the phrases again and again, catching on the word bloodlines. She'd run diagnostics on him before. She knew his magic was deep, layered, and laced with echoes of something vast and wild. But now, for the first time, she wondered if the cult knew exactly who he was. Or worse, what he could become. That night, back in their shared study quarters, Elara sat at her desk, fingers pressed together, eyes unfocused. The memory crystal hovered beside her in a stasis field, its faint hum threading through her thoughts. Across the room, Rowan watched her. "You're thinking too loud," he said gently. She looked up. "I'm thinking responsibly." "You're brooding responsibly. There's a difference." She let out a sigh. "They're accelerating. Whoever's behind this, they know how to manipulate the veil. They've refined their rituals. This isn't just some scattered cult praying to ancient shadows. They're organized. Yes. And they're targeting children like you." He stood, crossed the room, and stopped just short of touching her. "I'm not a child." She looked up at him, at the quiet strength in his posture, the worry in his eyes, the way his magic had begun to resonate with hers so naturally it felt like their pulses shared a wavelength. "No," she said softly. "You're not." He reached out, slowly, and brushed her knuckles with his fingertips. "Whatever happens, I'm with you." She didn't pull away. "I know." And for the first time since the sigil revealed itself, Elara felt not reassured but anchored. Chapter 5, Echoes of the Past, Choices of the Present. Elara dreamed of fire that night. Not the kind that burned skin or razed villages, but the kind that curled behind the eyes, slow and knowing, like the embers of something ancient. The kind of fire that didn't consume, but watched. In the dream, she stood in a forest that flickered between seasons, branches heavy with blossoms one breath, skeletal the next, ice cracking beneath her feet only to melt into golden leaves that whispered secrets she couldn't quite hear. She wasn't alone. A figure stood just beyond the birch ring, cloaked in silver shadows and moving like wind given thought. She recognized him before he spoke, not from sight, but from the familiar, vaguely infuriating hum of his magic. Elusive. Omniscient. Terribly dramatic. "Spirit King," she said dryly. "Here to offer unsolicited advice and morally vague prophecies, I assume?" His voice, when it came, sounded like wind chimes caught in a thunderstorm, soft, musical, and edged with danger. "You've grown sharper since the last time we spoke. Years of academic tenure and emotional repression will do that." The Spirit King stepped forward, though his form remained frustratingly indistinct. He was tall, built like a story rather than a man, and wore time like a borrowed coat, always draped in memories that weren't his. His eyes, if she could call them that, gleamed like mirrored flame. "You've brought him too close to the thread," he said. "And now the loom begins to strain." Elara narrowed her eyes. "If you're referring to Rowan, I swear to the gods I will hex you into a squirrel." "I've been a squirrel," he said, amused. It was enlightening. "Then I'll make you a bureaucrat. Permanently." The Spirit King didn't smile, but the air around him rippled with approval. "You've grown fond of him." She didn't answer. Not in words. But she knew the silence spoke volumes. He stepped closer, and the forest behind him swayed like breath itself held tension. "Elara," he said, quieter now, "you must understand. He is not merely a boy who wandered into your world. He is a convergence point. A catalyst." She exhaled, slowly. "You're saying he's a threat. I'm saying he's a choice. One the world will offer, and you must make." "I don't follow." "The veil is bleeding," he said. "The cult hastens what was once inevitable. When the fracture widens, when time folds and memory tears, you will have a decision to make. I've made plenty already. But not this one," he said, and for the first time, his voice didn't ring like prophecy, it ached like memory. "You may choose to save the world, or save him." The wind died. The dream went still. And Elara, for all her knowledge and power, felt suddenly small. "Why does it always come down to sacrifice?" she whispered. "Because love is the only variable strong enough to rewrite fate." She awoke just before dawn, heart pounding in a rhythm too erratic to be coincidence. Frostspire's guest room had never felt so warm. Rowan was asleep in the armchair across from her, head tilted, arms folded, legs long and tangled in his blanket like he'd passed out mid-vigil. His face was relaxed in sleep, lips parted slightly, golden lashes brushing his cheek. He looked peaceful. Untouched by the warning she carried in her chest like a weight she couldn't set down. She rose quietly, pulled a blanket from the nearby trunk, and gently draped it over him. He stirred. "Bad dream," he murmured, voice raspy from sleep but clear. Elara hesitated. "Something like that." Rowan blinked at her, then sat up slowly, the blanket sliding to his lap. Do I need to go punch it? A laugh slipped out before she could suppress it. No. But thank you for the offer. He studied her face for a moment, expression shifting from sleepy to quietly concerned. What did he say? She didn't pretend to misunderstand. That you're important, she said. Dangerously so. That you'll have a role in whatever's coming. Maybe the role. Rowan leaned forward. That doesn't scare me. It should. It only scares me if it means I lose you. Her breath caught. That was the thing about him, he never said what she expected. Just what mattered. She sank into the chair beside him, close enough that their knees touched. You won't lose me. Not unless I choose to be lost. He smiled softly. You don't strike me as someone who misplaces herself easily. I'm very organized, she said, deadpan. Except when it comes to cursed emotional entanglements and suspiciously loyal werewolf boys. Tragic weakness, he murmured. Someone should probably report you to the council. They'd die from the paperwork. He chuckled. Then sobered. Elara, if you had to choose between saving the world and... Don't, she said sharply, more forcefully than she intended. Then, softer, not now. We don't know enough yet. And I refuse to play martyr to a riddle wrapped in metaphysical guilt. He nodded, slowly. Okay. Then let's find out more. She tilted her head. You're remarkably good at staying focused when every divine entity keeps implying you're some kind of doomsday button. He shrugged. It's not the first time people have tried to turn me into something I didn't ask for. There it was again. That quiet resilience. That unyielding thread of self that hadn't broken, even after everything. It made her want to hold him and never let go. Instead, she stood. We need answers. Real ones. Not cryptic poetry from spirit monarchs. Library, she confirmed. He grinned. Race you there? She blinked. You do remember I can teleport, right? Then I'll cheat. You always do. And for a brief, golden moment, before the prophecy could settle too heavily on their shoulders, they laughed like the world wasn't watching. The mirror wasn't on any official inventory of Aurelian's restricted relics. Which, in Elara's opinion, was both suspicious and extremely on brand for the Academy's archival department, a group so secretive they practically spoke in footnotes and stored world-threatening artifacts in rooms labeled cleaning supplies. But the mirror was there, hidden beneath the old East Tower in a sealed chamber that hadn't been opened since before the veil solidified. She found it using a trail of inconsistencies, a warding sigil mislabeled in a restoration log, a distortion in the Academy's mana map that aligned just a little too cleanly with an age-old myth, and a whisper from the Spirit King that might have been a dare disguised as wisdom. She didn't bring Rowan at first. Not because she didn't trust him. If anything, she trusted him too much. Which was precisely the problem. Because the mirror of Elara didn't just show truth, it showed possibility. And Elara wasn't ready to see what that meant, not when the choices ahead of her already felt like knives she'd have to name. Still, he found her anyway. About 10 minutes after she breached the final ward, cracked the arcane seal with a muttered curse, possibly both literal and emotional, and stepped into a chamber that smelled like memory. The door opened behind her with the soft creak of guilt. Elara? His voice echoed softly, reverent but worried. You disappeared after lecture. Warren said you'd taken a teleport anchor. I did, she said without turning. I needed quiet. A pause. You came here to think in front of an ancient relic that drives half its viewers mad. She finally glanced back, unsurprised to see him already halfway across the room, bare feet silent on the stone, gaze locked on her with equal parts concern and exasperation. You're not mad, she said. Not yet. But I'm working with a powerful combination of optimism and poor decision-making. She smiled faintly, then turned back toward the mirror. It stood taller than her by a good few feet, framed in mithril etched with spirals of flame. The glass itself wasn't reflective in the traditional sense, it shimmered with shifting hues, like starlight bent through water, and carried the kind of presence that made the air hum as though the room were holding its breath. Tell me you didn't touch it, Rowan said quietly. I didn't need to. Her voice softened. It's already listening. She stepped closer, breath catching slightly as the image swirled into focus. And there she was, not the small, silver-haired girl the world insisted on seeing, but her true form. Taller, older, powerful, radiant, even. Her eyes glowed faintly with controlled energy, and her robes shimmered like the surface of a spell mid-casting. She stood not alone, but beside. Her throat closed. Rowan. The mirror showed Rowan beside her. Not a boy, not quite the man he was becoming, but something in between, older, stronger, marked by runes along his arms that pulsed in tandem with hers. They were holding hands. Not casually, but with the kind of deliberate intimacy that rewrote gravity. Rowan moved to stand beside her. Is that? He trailed off. She didn't look at him. Couldn't. It's a vision, she said. Not prophecy. Not fate. Just potential. One path out of many. He was silent for a moment. We look happy. You look powerful, she corrected. Marked. Bound. His voice was quiet. To you? She blinked. I don't know. Maybe. He studied the image for a long time, then reached toward the frame. Not touching, just hovering close, fingers barely grazing the air between worlds. I'd be okay with that, he said, so softly it barely reached her ears. She turned toward him fully. Rowan. No, he said, gently but firmly. Don't deflect. Don't tell me I'm young or confused or clinging to the first person who's ever treated me like I matter. I know all of that. I still mean it. Elara swallowed, suddenly aware of just how small the space between them had become. I didn't come here to see that, she said, though her voice lacked conviction. He tilted his head. Then what did you come to see? She hesitated. My past, she admitted. I thought maybe it would show me who I was before the curse. Before the council. Before all this responsibility turned me into a relic. You're not a relic, he said immediately. You're a force. A constant. She gave a small, breathless laugh. You're getting too good at saying things that undo me. I think I was always good at it, he said, voice low. I just didn't know how to try. They stood in silence, the mirror flickering quietly behind them, refracting their reflections into overlapping echoes. Elara found herself watching not the glass, but Rowan's face, his eyes, so steady and open, as if nothing she could say would make him run. I've made a lot of mistakes, she said finally. Hurt people. Pushed them away. I told myself it was safer that way. Was it? She looked down. No. Rowan stepped forward, barely a breath between them now. Then don't push me. I might not deserve you, she whispered. Too late, he said with a small, crooked smile. You've already got me. The mirror pulsed once, softly, like approval. Elara didn't kiss him. Not yet. But she reached for his hand, and this time, she didn't let go. Thank you for listening. If this story touched your heart, give it a like and subscribe for more beautiful tales. Tap the next thumbnail to continue your journey.